The warm glow of the evening sun painted the neighborhood in shades of orange and gold. But the small two-bedroom apartment where Benji lived with his mother Carla felt untouched by the day's beauty. Bills sat in a neat but growing pile on the kitchen table, and Carla sighed as she unpinned her faded waitress uniform from the drying line. Her hands trembled slightly as she folded it, the weight of another grueling day pressing down on her. Benji watched her from the couch, hugging a tattered stuffed bear he'd had since he was a toddler. At just 8 years old, he understood more than most kids his age. He noticed how his mom rubbed her temples when she thought he wasn't looking, or how she stared at her bank app late at night, the glow of the screen reflecting her worry. "Mom?" he said softly, breaking the silence. "Yes, sweetheart?" Carla replied, forcing a smile as she tucked the uniform into her work bag. "What if I could help you? You know, with money? Like, real money." Carla's smile faltered, and she knelt in front of him. "Benji, you help me every day just by being my brave boy. That's more than enough." Benji hesitated but nodded, his little fingers gripping the bear tightly. He didn't want to argue. Instead, his mind buzzed with possibilities. He couldn't sit by and watch his mom carry everything alone. The next morning, while Carla was still asleep, Benji sprang into action. Armed with a handful of lemons, a bag of sugar, and an old wooden table he dragged from the storage closet, he set up a lemonade stand in their front yard. With bold, colorful strokes, he painted a sign that read, "Benji's Fresh Lemonade, $1 per cup." When Carla woke up and saw him outside, her face shifted between surprise, concern, and, finally, reluctant admiration. "Benji," she said, stepping outside, "what is all this?" "I'm helping, Mom," he declared proudly. "I can sell lemonade, and we'll have extra money for rent." Carla crossed her arms, trying to hide how her throat tightened with emotion. "All right," she said finally, brushing a hand over his curly hair. "But stay where I can see you, okay?" Benji beamed and got to work. At first, business was slow. A neighbor walking their dog stopped to buy a cup, patting Benji on the head and telling him to keep up the good work. Soon after, 2 teenagers riding bikes paused, jokingly bought lemonade, and rode off laughing. By mid-afternoon, Benji's little plastic jar began to fill with coins and crumpled bills. His heart swelled with pride, but not everyone in the neighborhood was smiling. Across the street, Mr. Dillard sat on his porch, frowning as he watched Benji's stand grow busier. A retired accountant with a self-righteous streak, he was known for his gruff demeanor and his obsession with keeping the neighborhood in order. Benji didn't notice Mr. Dillard approaching until his shadow loomed over the stand. "What's going on here?" Dillard barked, his tone sharp enough to make Benji flinch. "I'm selling lemonade, sir," Benji said nervously, gripping the edge of the table. Dillard scowled, his gaze moving to the sign, then to the jar of money. "Do you have a permit for this?" Permit?" Benji's voice trembled as he looked toward his mother on the porch. Carla was already rushing to his side, her face tight with concern. "He's just a kid," Carla said, stepping between Dillard and the stand. "It's a lemonade stand, for heaven's sake." "He's not hurting anyone." Dillard's frown deepened. "It's not about that. This is a residential area, not a marketplace. What if something happens? Kids shouldn't be left unsupervised out here. It's a liability." Benji's eyes widened, tears pooling as he clung to his mother's arm. "I'm not doing anything wrong," he whispered. "Rules are rules," Dillard said coldly. "If you don't shut this down, I'll have to call the authorities." Carla's hands clenched into fists at her sides. Her voice shook as she replied, "He's trying to help his family. You should be ashamed of yourself." But Dillard merely turned and walked away, muttering under his breath. Across the street, a neighbor peeked through their curtains, but quickly disappeared when Carla's gaze met theirs. Another passerby shook their head silently but kept walking. Benji wiped his eyes with the back of his hand as Carla knelt beside him. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I just wanted to help." "You didn't do anything wrong, Benji," Carla said. her own voice thick with emotion. "And no matter what happens, we'll face it together. I promise." That night, as Benji lay in bed, he stared at the faint glow of the moon through his window. His heart ached with the memory of Mr. Dillard's words, but he clung to the warmth of his mother's promise. Tomorrow, he thought, clutching his stuffed bear close. Tomorrow will be better. It has to be. The hum of a car engine echoed faintly down the street as Benji adjusted the crooked legs of his lemonade stand. Business was slow that morning, and the overcast sky made everything feel heavier. Carla sat on the porch, her eyes darting nervously to the corner where the stand stood proudly. A faint flicker of red and blue lights appeared in the distance. Benji didn't notice at first, too busy arranging the few dollar bills and coins in his jar. But Carla froze, her breath catching in her throat. "Benji," she called, her voice tight. "Yeah, Mom," he said, glancing up with a smile. Her answer never came. The patrol car rolled to a slow stop directly in front of their yard. The moment Benji saw it, the color drained from his face. The two officers stepped out with contrasting demeanors. The male officer, a tall man with a square jaw and sharp, impatient eyes, strode toward the stand like a man on a mission. His partner, a younger woman holding a clipboard, lingered behind, her expression unreadable, but her steps hesitant. "Is this your stand?" the male officer asked curtly, stopping just short of the table. Benji nodded slowly, gripping the edge of the table as if it might disappear beneath him. "Yes, sir." The officer frowned, his gaze shifting to the hand-painted sign, the jar of money, and finally back to Benji. "You got a permit to sell here?" "A permit?" Benji repeated, confused. "We don't have time for excuses, kid," the officer said, his tone hard. "There are rules for a reason. People like you need to learn that early." Carla hurried down the steps, her voice firm but shaking. People like him? He's 8 years old. What rules could he possibly be breaking with a lemonade stand? The female officer finally stepped forward, her face softening. "Ma'am, we received a complaint. It's about operating a business without a permit. We're just doing our job." Carla glared at her. "Your job?" "Your job is to intimidate a little boy who's just trying to help his family?" Benji's voice broke through, shaky and small. "It's not a business. It's just lemonade. I didn't do anything wrong." The male officer sighed as if this were a waste of his time. "Look, we've got laws for a reason. You're not supposed to set up shop without permission. Shut it down now, or we'll have to take action." Tears welled up in Benji's eyes. "Please, sir, this is all I have," he pleaded, clutching the jar of money close to his chest. The officer frowned but didn't hesitate. He reached for the table, yanking it apart with quick, efficient movements. The sign toppled to the ground, and Benji instinctively lunged for it, holding it tightly as if it might protect him. "No, stop, please." "Hey," Carla shouted, grabbing the officer's arm. "This isn't necessary." "Ma'am," the male officer barked, jerking his arm away. "Stand back, or we'll have to file a report against you too." The female officer stepped between them, her voice low. "Sir, maybe we should follow procedure," the man snapped, cutting her off. A small crowd had gathered by now, watching in silence. Some neighbors whispered to each other, shaking their heads, but no one dared to step forward. Except for one man, a middle-aged neighbor, Mr. Harris, walked cautiously toward the officers, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Come on, officers. It's just a kid selling lemonade. Do you really think this is worth the trouble?" The male officer didn't even glance at him. "Stay out of this, sir. It's a matter of public compliance." Mr. Harris stopped, his shoulders sagging. "Unbelievable," he muttered, retreating back into the crowd. When the officers finished dismantling the stand, the male officer handed the broken pieces of wood to Carla and pointed to the jar in Benji's hands. "Count yourself lucky we're letting you keep that. Next time, there'll be fines." Carla stared at him, her knuckles white as she gripped the broken wood. "You should be ashamed of yourself," she hissed. Benji stood frozen, his tears streaming freely now. The jar trembled in his small hands as he whispered, "Why? Why did you do that? I didn't hurt anyone." The female officer hesitated, her lips parting as if to respond, but her partner shot her a sharp look, silencing her. Without another word, the officers returned to their car and drove off, leaving the broken remnants of Benji's dream behind. Carla knelt down beside Benji, pulling him into a tight hug. "It's okay, baby," she whispered, though her own voice cracked. "We'll fix this. Somehow, we'll fix it." Benji didn't answer. He stared at the shattered pieces of his stand, his chest heaving with sobs. Slowly, he reached for the sign, now bent and dirty, and held it against his chest. As the crowd dispersed, Mr. Harris lingered for a moment, his hands in his pockets. "You hang in there, kid," he said softly before turning and walking away. That night, as Benji lay in bed, he clutched the broken sign close to him. The edges of the wood were splintered, but to him, it was the only piece of his dream he had left. "I just wanted to help," he whispered into the darkness, his voice breaking. Carla, sitting at the kitchen table, stared at the bills and the jar of money. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking silently. In the quiet of the night, hope seemed distant. But deep down, Benji held on to a fragile sliver of determination. The days after the police tore apart Benji's lemonade stand passed like a slow, heavy storm. He barely spoke, dragging himself through the motions of school and home. The broken sign from his stand still sat propped against the wall in the living room, a splintered reminder of what he'd lost. Every time Benji looked at it, guilt gnawed at him. He remembered his mom's face that day, her hands trembling as she argued with the officers, the worry etched into her expression ever since. He had tried to help, but instead, he felt like he'd made things worse. At school, the whispers started before he even set foot in the classroom. Kids who had seen the police car outside his house told the story, each retelling adding more dramatic flair. "He got arrested for selling lemonade," one boy said loudly in the hallway. "Nah, the cops just shut him down. Guess you can't even trust lemonade these days," another joked, drawing laughs from a small group. Benji kept his head down, gripping the straps of his backpack as he walked past. In class, the taunts continued. "Are you gonna sell lemonade here too?" A girl sneered as he sat down. "Better be careful," another chimed in. "The teacher might call the cops if you try." Benji tried to block out their voices, but the shame clung to him. Every laugh, every comment felt like a weight pressing on his chest. Things weren't much better at home. Carla worked longer hours, leaving before Benji woke up and returning long after dinner. The few moments they had together were filled with strained smiles and tired reassurances. One afternoon, Benji overheard two neighbors talking as he walked back from school. "She should have known better than to let him do that," one woman muttered, standing by her mailbox. "Now the whole neighborhood is talking." "It's not just her," another replied. "I saw her at the grocery store yesterday, and she just kept her head down the whole time. It's embarrassing." Benji quickened his pace, his cheeks burning. He wanted to shout at them, to defend his mom, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he ran home, threw his backpack on the floor, and buried himself under his blanket. That night, as Carla washed dishes, Benji sat in the living room, staring at the broken sign. His small hands brushed over the jagged edges, and he felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. Maybe they were right. Maybe he really was a failure. The next day, there was a knock at the door. Benji froze, his heart racing. What if it was someone else coming to judge him? For a moment, he thought about ignoring it, but the knocking came again, softer this time. "Benji, it's Mr. Harris," a voice called from the other side. Benji hesitated before opening the door a crack. Mr. Harris, the older man from down the street, stood there with an umbrella in one hand and a steaming thermos in the other. "Your mom around?" Mr. Harris asked gently. Benji shook his head, opening the door just enough to step onto the porch. "She's at work." Mr. Harris studied the boy for a moment, his kind eyes filled with concern. "Mind if I sit with you for a bit?" Benji shrugged. "I guess." The two of them sat on the steps in silence for a while, the drizzle from the morning rain settling into a light mist. Finally, Mr. Harris handed the thermos to Benji. "Hot cocoa," he said. "Figured you could use something warm." Benji took the thermos but didn't drink. He stared at the cracked sidewalk, his thoughts swirling. "You know, when I was about your age, something like this happened to me," Mr. Harris began. "I tried to sell newspapers in front of the hardware store. Didn't have permission, I guess. Cops came and told me to pack it up." Benji looked up at him, his curiosity piqued. "What did you do?" Mr. Harris smiled faintly. "At first, nothing. I was scared. Thought I'd done something wrong. But my dad, he told me, don't ever let someone make you feel small for trying to do something good." Benji gripped the thermos tightly. "But what if it's too hard?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What if I can't fix it?" "Mister," Harris placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then you get up and try again. Not for them, for yourself." The words lingered long after Mr. Harris left. That night, as Benji sat at the kitchen table, his gaze drifted to the broken sign. He reached for it, his fingers brushing against the paint that had begun to chip. For a moment, he thought about throwing it away, letting it all go. But something inside him stopped. He grabbed a pencil and a sheet of paper, his hands trembling as he stared at the blank page. The fear of failing again loomed over him, but slowly he began to sketch. A new lemonade stand, bigger and sturdier than the last. When Carla came home and found him hunched over the paper, her heart swelled. "Planning something?" she asked, crouching beside him. Benji looked up, his expression uncertain but determined. "I want to try again, Mom, but what if it happens again? What if they come back?" Carla brushed a hand over his curls. "Then we'll face it together. Whatever happens, you don't have to do it alone." Benji nodded, and for the first time in days, he smiled faintly. Later that night, Benji placed the broken sign on his bedside table. It wasn't just a reminder of what he'd lost. It was a promise to himself that he wouldn't give up. As he drifted to sleep, he dreamed of sunny days, long lines of people waiting for lemonade, and a world where small dreams could grow big. The morning air was thick with an uneasy stillness as Benji sat at the kitchen table. His sketch of the new lemonade stand crumpled in his hands. He couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled over him since the day the police had shut him down. Carla was scrolling through her phone, sipping coffee to stave off the exhaustion from yet another late shift. Suddenly, her body stiffened, and the clink of her cup on the counter snapped Benji out of his thoughts. "What is it, Mom?" he asked cautiously. Carla's eyes darted over the screen, her lips pressed tightly together. She turned the phone toward him, her voice trembling. Someone recorded what happened. On the screen, Benji saw himself, his small frame, his tear-streaked face, his trembling hands clutching the jar of money. The video showed everything. The officers dismantling the stand, his desperate pleas, and Carla kneeling beside him, her voice breaking as she tried to comfort him. Benji's heart sank. It was like watching his worst memory play on repeat, now visible to the whole world. Why would someone do this? He whispered, his voice barely audible. Carla hesitated, struggling to find the right words. Maybe they wanted people to know the truth. Benji shook his head, his fingers gripping the table. But now everyone can see me. What if they think I'm bad? What if they think I deserved it? "Benji," Carla said firmly, placing a hand on his shoulder, "you did nothing wrong. This video shows that. It shows how unfair this all was." But Benji wasn't convinced. The raw vulnerability of seeing himself reduced to tears felt like a second punishment. He pushed away from the table and retreated to his room, the weight of the video crushing him. By midday, the video had gone viral. Carla's phone buzzed endlessly with notifications, each new message adding to her growing anxiety. Comments flooded in from strangers, some offering heartfelt support. "This is heartbreaking. That little boy deserves better. How can anyone justify treating a child like this? Shame on them." But mixed among the positivity were crueler messages that cut deeply. Why does she let her kid break the law? She's just playing victim now. Rules exist for a reason. Maybe she should teach him that instead of whining online. Carla gripped her phone tightly, her chest heaving with anger as she read the harsher comments. How dare they? She muttered under her breath. They don't know us. They don't know anything. She slammed the phone onto the counter, the noise startling Benji, who had crept back into the kitchen. Mom? He asked hesitantly. Carla exhaled, forcing a weak smile. Sorry, baby. It's just, some people are mean, and they don't care about the truth. But there are a lot of good people, two people, who see how special you are. Benji glanced at the phone, his stomach nodding as he imagined the things people were saying. What if they're right? He asked quietly. What if I shouldn't have done it? Carla knelt down, taking his face gently in her hands. Look at me, Benji. You're not wrong for dreaming big. Don't ever let anyone make you feel small for trying to do something good. Benji nodded, though doubt still lingered in his heart. That evening, a knock at the door broke the tense silence. Carla opened it to find a young woman with a press badge pinned to her jacket. Hi, I'm Dana Coleman from Channel 5 News, the reporter said, her smile polite but calculated. I'd love to speak with you and Benji about what happened. This story is touching a lot of people. Carla hesitated, her instincts on high alert. I'm not sure if that's a good idea. He's already been through a lot. Dana's smile softened, and her tone became more earnest. I understand, but if you tell your side of the story, it could shine a light on the unfair treatment you faced. Maybe even inspire change. Carla glanced over her shoulder at Benji, who stood a few feet away, clutching the broken sign in his hands. She turned back to the reporter, her voice firm. Let me talk to my son. If he's not comfortable, we won't do it. After Dana left, Carla sat beside Benji on the couch. What do you think, sweetheart? Do you want to talk to her? Benji ran his fingers over the jagged edges of the sign, his mind racing. What if they make it worse? What if they laugh at me again? Carla placed a hand on his shoulder. That might happen, but if you're ready to share your story, it could also show people how strong you are. It's your choice, Benji. I'll support whatever you decide. Benji stared at the sign for a long moment, remembering how it had once stood tall and proud, announcing his dream to the neighborhood. Now it was cracked and dirty, but it still held a part of him. I think I want to tell them, he said finally. Not for me, but so they know it's not okay to treat people like that. Carla's eyes welled with tears, and she pulled him into a hug. I'm so proud of you, baby. The next day, the interview aired, showing clips from the viral video alongside Benji's soft but steady voice as he explained why he started his lemonade stand. I just wanted to help my mom, he said simply. I didn't think it was wrong to try. The segment struck a nerve with viewers across the country. Donations began pouring in, and kind letters arrived at their doorstep. One card read, For your bravery and determination. Don't ever stop dreaming. But not all reactions were kind. An anonymous message sent to Carla's email read, Maybe if you raised him better, he wouldn't have needed to help. Stop milking the sympathy. Carla deleted the email and hugged Benji tighter that night. No matter what anyone says, she told him, you're stronger than they'll ever understand. Benji placed the broken sign on his bedside table, the symbol of his dream and his resilience standing tall despite its scars. And this time, he wasn't afraid to dream again. The days following the viral video were suffocating for Carla and Benji. The support they received was heartwarming, but the growing tide of hateful comments and anonymous messages left a shadow over their home. Carla became hyper-aware of everything her surroundings, the phone buzzing constantly on the counter, even the eyes of neighbors when she walked outside. The cruel words from strangers cut deeper than she wanted to admit. One afternoon, as Carla left the diner after a long shift, she bumped into Mrs. Carter, a regular customer who lived nearby. Carla, Mrs. Carter said with a tight smile, I heard about what happened. Shame, really, but you know, these things blow over. Carla nodded, forcing a polite smile. Thanks, Before she could leave, Mrs. Carter added, "Just be careful, though. A lot of people don't like, well, the attention it's bringing to the neighborhood." Carla walked away quickly, her cheeks burning. By the time she got home, she was trembling with anger. She slammed her bag onto the counter, startling Benji, who was quietly doodling in the corner. "What's wrong, Mom?" he asked hesitantly. Carla took a deep breath, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. "Nothing, baby. It's just, people can be mean. Don't ever listen to them, okay?" But Benji was already listening. At school, the taunts from classmates grew louder. "Do you need a permit to sit here?" A boy sneered in the cafeteria, making his table erupt in laughter. "You're famous lemonade criminal," another chimed in, smirking as he passed. Benji tried to tune them out, but their words echoed in his mind. He began withdrawing at home, spending more time alone in his room. Even when Carla tried to comfort him, he answered in short, clipped sentences. One night, as Carla scrolled through her messages, she stopped at a particularly cruel email. "People like you are what's wrong with this country. Teach your kid to follow the rules, or next time, the consequences will be worse." Her chest tightened, and she locked the phone, her hands trembling. She didn't want Benji to see, but the stress was impossible to hide. She hesitated to even go into the store, fearing the glances and murmurs she might encounter. As she stood in the kitchen staring blankly at the pile of dishes, Benji walked in, clutching his broken sign. "Maybe I should stop, Mom," he said softly, his voice cracking. Carla turned to him, her heart breaking at the sight of his tear-streaked face. "Why would you say that, Benji?" "Because maybe they're right," he whispered, looking down. "Maybe I was wrong to even try." Carla knelt in front of him, taking his hands in hers. "No, baby, they're wrong. You tried because you're brave and because you wanted to help. Don't ever let anyone take that from you." Benji nodded weakly, but the doubt lingered in his eyes. The next morning, the tension reached a boiling point. Carla opened the door to find an official envelope from the city council. She read the letter aloud, her voice growing more incredulous with each line. "Ms. Daniels, while we recognize the emotional outcry surrounding this matter, we must emphasize the importance of maintaining public order. Unauthorized stands, regardless of the operator's age, violate municipal codes. Continued violations may result in fines or further legal action." Carla's hands shook as she read the last line. "They're threatening us with fines?" she muttered, her voice thick with disbelief. Benji, standing nearby, looked like the wind had been knocked out of him. "So, I really did something wrong?" "No," Carla said sharply, crumpling the letter in her hands. "They're just trying to scare us. But we're not going to let them win." That evening, a knock at the door interrupted their tense silence. Carla opened it to find a man in a neatly pressed suit, holding a leather briefcase. His warm smile seemed out of place amidst the storm they were weathering. "Miss Daniels?" he asked. "Yes," Carla replied cautiously. "My name is Andrew Monroe. I'm an attorney, and I've been following your son's story. I'd like to help." Carla's eyes narrowed. "Help? Why? What's in it for you?" Andrew raised his hands in a gesture of reassurance. "I don't blame you for being skeptical, but I've seen too many stories like this, where good people are punished for trying to do the right thing. I think we have a strong case to fight this legally." Carla hesitated, crossing her arms. "I've had enough people pretending to be on our side, just to make things worse. How do I know you're not the same?" Andrew's expression softened. "Because I've been where you are. My mother ran a small bakery when I was a kid. The city shut her down for a zoning violation, and we never recovered. I became a lawyer because of her. Let me help your son keep his dream alive." Carla studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, but if this makes things worse for Benji—" "It won't," Andrew promised. A week later, Carla and Andrew stood before the city council. The room was small, but imposing, its walls lined with photos of past commissioners. Benji stayed home, too nervous to attend, while Mr. Harris kept him company. One council member, a stern-faced woman in a gray blazer, began the meeting with a sharp tone. Ms. Daniels, we understand the emotional nature of this case, but rules exist for a reason. What exactly are you hoping to achieve here? Carla squared her shoulders, her voice steady but firm. I'm hoping to achieve fairness. My son wasn't trying to break the law. He was trying to help his family. And if you can't see the difference, then maybe the law needs to change. Andrew stepped in, outlining a loophole in the city's ordinances that allowed for small temporary stands operated by minors with minimal supervision. The council murmured amongst themselves, some visibly annoyed, others intrigued. After what felt like hours of tense debate, the Gray Blazer council member sighed. Given the circumstances, we'll grant an exception for the Daniels family, effective immediately. However, this doesn't set a precedent for future cases. Carla exhaled deeply, relief washing over her. Thank you, she said, her voice shaking. As they left the council chamber, Andrew patted her shoulder. You did great in there. Benji's lucky to have you. Carla smiled, her heart lighter than it had been in weeks. Thank you, Andrew, for everything. When Carla returned home and told Benji the news, his face lit up for the first time in days. He hugged her tightly, the broken sign still clutched in his hand. We can do it again? He asked, his voice filled with hope. Yes, baby, Carla said, brushing his curls back. And this time, no one's going to stop us. Benji smiled, looking at the sign. It was still cracked and worn, but now it felt like a badge of honor, a reminder of how far they'd come and how much farther they could go. The morning air felt alive with energy, the kind of day where the sun seemed to shine just a little brighter. Benji and Carla stood in their front yard, taking in the sight of the new lemonade stand, now sturdier and more vibrant than ever. The stand had become a labor of love for the community. Its bright yellow paint gleamed under the sun, a gift from Mr. Harris, who'd insisted on covering the cost. The lettering on the front, Benji's Lemonade, stronger than ever, was hand-painted by a neighbor who ran an arts and crafts store. Even the jars for the lemonade had been donated, each labeled with a small sticker that read, Dream Big, in looping script. Wow, Benji said softly, running his hand along the smooth wood. He could hardly believe it was real. You did this, sweetheart, Carla said, crouching beside him. Everyone came together because of you. This stand is not just lemonade, it's hope. Benji nodded, his small hand clutching the new sign as he tried to steady his nerves. I hope they like it, Carla smiled. They will. The reopening began quietly. Carla stood nearby as Benji poured lemonade into paper cups for their first customers, Mr. Harris, who bought 2 cups, and a woman from the neighborhood who slipped him a $5 bill with a wink. You're an inspiration, young man, she said warmly. Thank you, Benji replied, his voice shy but sincere. As the morning wore on, more people arrived, some bringing their children, others coming out of curiosity after hearing about the stand on the news. The small yard buzzed with laughter and chatter, a stark contrast to the tension that had hung over it weeks earlier. But Benji's confidence faltered when, around noon, a familiar black and white patrol car appeared at the end of the street. Carla's eyes immediately locked onto the vehicle, her body tensing. Benji froze, the paper cup in his hands trembling. Mom, he whispered. It's okay, Benji, Carla said firmly, standing straighter. We've done everything right. Let's see what they want. The car rolled to a stop, and the 2 officers stepped out, the same ones who had torn down the original stand. The male officer's face was as unreadable as ever, but the female officer hesitated, her expression uneasy. The crowd grew quieter, the festive mood dimming as the officers approached. Benji's heart raced as the male officer spoke. Ma'am, he began, his voice clipped. We've received complaints about noise and traffic congestion in the area. Is this your stand? Carla's chin lifted, her voice steady. It's my son's stand, and we have every right to be here. We're following the rules this time. The officer's eyes narrowed, his tone hardening. Just because you have a permit doesn't mean you can cause disturbances. There are still regulations, and we're not breaking them, Carla cut in sharply. Her voice wavered slightly, but her determination was unwavering. This stand isn't just about lemonade. It's about standing up for what's right. Maybe instead of coming here to intimidate us, you should focus on real problems. A murmur rippled through the crowd. One voice broke the tension. Leave the boy alone. It was Mr. Harris, stepping forward, his arms crossed. Others chimed in. He's just a kid. This is ridiculous. Don't you have better things to do? The officer stiffened, clearly uncomfortable with the growing resistance. His partner leaned in, whispering something in his ear. He glanced at the crowd, then back at Benji and Carla. Fine, he said gruffly. Just make sure you're not blocking the street. With that, the officers turned and walked back to their car. As the vehicle pulled away, a cheer erupted from the crowd. Benji looked up at his mom, his wide eyes filled with awe. They left, he whispered. They left, Carla repeated, her voice cracking with emotion. And they're not coming back. The celebration that followed felt like magic. People continued to arrive, bringing cookies, balloons, and even handmade signs with messages like Benji's lemonade, changing the world one cup at a time. A local musician played cheerful tunes on a guitar, filling the air with joy. Benji worked tirelessly, pouring cup after cup of lemonade, but he didn't mind. Each smile, each kind word from a customer felt like a piece of his confidence returning. At one point, a little girl with pigtails handed him a crumpled dollar and said, "When I grow up, I want to be just like you." Benji's throat tightened and he blinked back tears. "Thank you," he said softly, handing her a cup of lemonade. As the sun began to set, Benji and Carla sat on the porch, watching the last few customers leave. The jar on the stand was overflowing with money, and Benji's face was flushed with happiness and exhaustion. "You did it, sweetheart," Carla said, wrapping an arm around him. "And look at all the people who believe in you." Benji nodded, gazing out at the stand. "It's not just a stand anymore, is it?" "No," Carla replied with a smile. "It's something much bigger." That evening, there was another knock at the door. Carla opened it to find Andrew Monroe standing there, holding a small, wrapped box. "I had to come see the star of the show," Andrew said with a grin. Benji ran up to greet him, his face lighting up. "Mr. Monroe, did you see?" "We did it." Andrew chuckled, kneeling to meet Benji's gaze. "I did see. And I think what you've done here is amazing. You've proven to everyone that dreams, big or small, matter." Benji tilted his head, curious. "Do you think it'll get even bigger?" Andrew smiled, handing him the box. "Open this and find out." Inside was a set of business cards that read, "Benji's lemonade, stronger than ever. Now delivering across town." Benji's eyes widened. "Delivering? You mean we can grow even more?" "That's up to you," Andrew said. "This is just the beginning." Carla placed a hand on Andrew's shoulder. "Thank you for believing in us." Andrew nodded. "The world could use more people like Benji and more moms like you." As Benji got ready for bed, he placed the broken sign back on his bedside table. It was no longer a symbol of failure, but of strength, a reminder of how far he'd come. "Mom," he said, hugging his stuffed bear. "Yes, sweetheart? Do you think one day I can make enough lemonade for everyone in the world?" Carla laughed softly, brushing his hair back. "I think you can do anything you set your mind to, Benji. You've already proven that." Benji smiled, closing his eyes. As he drifted off to sleep, he dreamed of sunny days, endless lines of customers, and a lemonade stand that reached farther than he'd ever imagined. The story of Benji's lemonade stand continued to spread far beyond the small neighborhood. What had started as a humble effort to help his mom had grown into a movement, inspiring people across the country. Letters of encouragement poured in daily, and donations from strangers helped Benji and Carla not only keep the stand running but also dream even bigger. Benji's stand became a symbol of resilience. People lined up for lemonade not just for the drink, but for what it represented: hope, determination, and justice. One day, as Benji prepared to open the stand, Carla noticed a delivery truck pulling up in front of their house. A driver hopped out, handing her a large box. "Who's it from?" Benji asked, curious. Carla opened the package, her jaw dropping. Inside were professionally branded bottles of lemonade, each with a sleek label that read, "Benji's Lemonade Justice" in every sip. A note accompanied the bottles, written in elegant handwriting. "Dear Benji, your story touched me deeply. I own a small beverage company and would love to partner with you to expand your stand into something even greater. Let's bring your lemonade to people everywhere. Sarah DeWitt, CEO, Lemoncraft." Benji stared at the bottles, his eyes wide. "They want to sell my lemonade? Like, in stores?" Carla crouched beside him, her hand on his shoulder. "Looks like it, baby. This could be huge." Benji hesitated. "But what if it's too big? What if I can't do it?" Carla squeezed his shoulder gently. "You don't have to do it alone. We've come this far together, and we'll keep going. Besides, you've already shown you can handle anything." Benji nodded, a small smile forming. "Okay, let's do it." The partnership with Lemoncraft brought new challenges and opportunities. Sarah DeWitt met with Benji and Carla personally, guiding them through the process of creating a small business. Benji's face lit up every time he saw a bottle of his lemonade, knowing it was reaching people far beyond his neighborhood. Within weeks, the bottles were on shelves in local stores, and the brand began to gain traction. Social media exploded with posts of people holding the lemonade, tagging Benji with messages like, "Teaching my kids what resilience looks like. Thanks, Benji. Lemonade with a message. Support this amazing kid." The impact was immediate. Orders poured in, and Sarah worked tirelessly to keep up with the demand. A portion of the proceeds went toward community programs that supported young entrepreneurs, an idea Benji insisted on. "This isn't just about me," he told Carla one night. "There are other kids who have dreams too. I want to help them." Carla hugged him tightly. "You've got the biggest heart, baby. I'm so proud of you." Not everyone was thrilled about Benji's success, though. The city council, already embarrassed by the backlash from the initial incident, began to face increasing scrutiny. Community leaders demanded changes to outdated ordinances that stifled small businesses, especially those run by kids. At a public hearing, Carla spoke passionately about the importance of nurturing young entrepreneurs. "Children like Benji aren't just learning how to run a business," she said, her voice steady. "They're learning how to dream, how to face challenges, and how to grow from them. These laws need to reflect that." The hearing ended with a promise to review and revise the regulations, a small but significant victory for families like Carla and Benji. As the months passed, Benji's lemonade stand continued to grow. Lemoncraft expanded its distribution, and Benji became the face of the brand. Despite the newfound fame, he remained grounded, often spending time at the original stand in his yard, serving lemonade to the neighbors who had supported him from the start. One afternoon, as Benji handed a cup to a customer, a familiar figure approached. "Officer Johnson," Benji said, his voice hesitant as he recognized the male officer who had dismantled his stand months earlier. The officer stood awkwardly, his hands in his pockets. "Hi, Benji," he said. "I saw your story on the news. Looks like you've done pretty well for yourself." Benji nodded slowly, unsure of what to say. Johnson cleared his throat. "Listen, I wanted to say I'm sorry for what happened back then. I didn't handle it right." Benji studied the man for a moment, then nodded. "It's okay," he said quietly. "I think I needed to go through it to get here." Johnson smiled faintly, tipping his hat before walking away. Carla, who had been watching from the porch, came over and hugged Benji. "You handled that like a pro, baby. I'm proud of you." Months later, Benji was invited to speak at a national youth entrepreneurship conference. Standing on a stage in front of hundreds of people, he held a bottle of his lemonade and the broken sign he had kept as a reminder. "When I started selling lemonade," he began, "I just wanted to help my mom. I didn't know it would turn into something this big, but it wasn't easy. There were times I wanted to give up. Times when I thought maybe I wasn't good enough." He paused, looking out at the audience. "But what I learned is that dreams are worth fighting for, even when it's hard, even when people tell you to stop. Because dreams don't just change your life. They can change the lives of everyone around you." The audience erupted into applause, a standing ovation for the boy who had turned a simple lemonade stand into a movement for justice and hope. That night, back home, Benji sat on the porch with Carla, looking up at the stars. "Do you think this will last, Mom?" he asked softly. Carla smiled, pulling him close. "What you've built, Benji, is more than just lemonade. It's a legacy, and legacies don't go away, they grow." Benji rested his head against her shoulder, his heart full of gratitude and determination. As the night stretched on, he thought about the broken sign still sitting on his bedside table. It wasn't just a reminder of the past anymore. It was proof of what could be built from even the most shattered dreams. And this time, Benji knew there were no limits to how far his dreams could go.